The public meeting of the City of Tallahassee Independent Ethics Board is now called to order on this day, Tuesday, March 21st, 2023 at 4:05 p.m. The board members are present here at City Hall along with members of the public. With the assistance of the Communications Department and the Information Technology Department, this meeting is live streamed on the Ethics Board's website, and we are recording it for future reference. There is a delay with online communications. We should all be patient. As always, we thank those members of the City of Tallahassee for their support. For those attending the meeting online, please make sure your microphone is muted. Last week, we asked the public to make a request by email to ethics@talgov.com by 1 p.m. on the day of the meeting if they wish to speak online on agenda or non-agenda items. Those who have submitted their names will be given a chance to speak as scheduled. For those of you who are present and wish to speak, please complete a speaker request form and forward it to the administrative specialist, Ms. Tasker Leverson Green. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now we'll have a roll call.
Kirsten Costa,
Present.
Ernie Payne.
Here.
Patrick Kelly.
Here.
Rico Calhoun.
Here.
Adam Commissar.
Here. We have a quorum.
And we have an addendum to the agenda.
Yes, you received an amendment to the advisory opinion. That's in your booklet. The revised version. We made one other revision that's in the addendum, which was just a cite on a footnote, but otherwise it's what you received yesterday. And also on the 6C monthly issue report, you received an addendum where we added closure of 2 complaints. And because you received them late, we will walk through them. You get a chance to review them at that point. Comment if you wish.
Okay, now we'll have an approval of the minutes for February 21st. Board members, has everyone received the agenda and some documents and had a chance to read them?
Yes.
Any concerns or comments about the minutes?
What's that?
Dean makes the motion and Mr. Commissar seconds. All in favor? All opposed? All right, do we have any public comment on agenda items?
We have one, Mr. Stanley Sims, on a input on agenda items regarding agenda item number, just put a check.
2 that was closed.
6C.
On 6.
My name is Stanley Sims. Point of information before you start my clock, man. Since I have 2 closed items, and I have 3 minutes for each closed item.
I'll give you the leeway for each item.
I appreciate that. The first item, what deals with the complaint where I deal with the filing of having the secret meetings at the mayor's house. I can literally see that's literally out of your jurisdiction. And the way I filed that, because of, and you've heard this before, because of my own self-protection. I also want to compliment you. I don't know who wrote my response, Reed or Mr. Floyd. But I also noticed that the response are more to of a 10th, 11th grade user-friendly, and you correlate the 2 points, whether a person may agree with them or not. it was an easier read than what I've had to deal with in the past. My other point, and that's why I purposely reached out to you, Mr. Adams, and you, Ms. Calhoun. Every chance I get to highlight or elevate the authority you don't have, I'm going to do that. I believe that this board is on the right road. We're just not where we need to get to. And I'm doing a time check. Someone's going to stop me on the 3.
We got 1.5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. I'm under a threat, sir. Whether you guys see it or not, I am. And your authority now on this board is really being challenged. Let me show you how it works. The firing of the HR director. When I came to turn in my complaint in reference to how I've been treated at the last 2 city commission meetings, when I went to his office, I view my complaint very confidential, very serious. He didn't close the door. He left the door open. He stood standing out. I'm trying to show him literal videotape of what happened to me. I turned it up. I said, excuse my expression, hell, if you're not going to disrespect me, then I'm not going to respect you. I literally tell him, I'm concerned that I might get shot. You know what his response was? Well, don't do nothing to get shot. You know who I thought about, Ms. Calhoun? Breonna Taylor. What did she do to get shot? Nichols. What did he do to get shot? I'm gonna roll into my other 3 minutes. I don't understand the board not willing to investigate. I was heckled, not in a dark alley, not in the hood, in a city commission meeting in front of the mayor and commissioners on tape. An email was sent from the city manager exhorting his authority to HR, ethics, inclusion, diversity and inclusion, or whatever fancy title. I have already reviewed this case and I'm dismissing it. How can you review a case that haven't been properly submitted? Now, all of what I sent Mr. Dwight, he was able to turn that around with a denial in record speed. I turned in the one in reference to the meeting at the mayor's house in November. It's March. So don't tell me his firing of this HR director has not changed the culture of these employees. Then he asked me to leave his office, which I did. I suffer with anxiety and depression. And Mr. Adams, I think only way I can help through it is through my medication. And my friends constantly saying, Stanley, that's what they want. They want you to go off. So as I'm leaving, he said, I tried to help you. And I'm saying to myself, you tried. You tried. Explain to me. It's come, and I don't know if you guys have read my complaint. And I wish you would. I really wish you would. And ask yourself, with all of that going on, how could he, in record speed, turn that down when it's not as detailed as the one about the House meeting. Something here is not right. And I'm just asking you to educate me because I don't see the consistency in the way we process complaints. Thank you for your time.
Do you have any other? No. Next, we have our ethics office report.
During this period, as written, we conducted new employee training. And I would say with enthusiasm, more and more, not only getting new employees, but employees are starting to volunteer to take the training. I had to cancel one training because John and I are going out of town. And so I won't be here for the training. Someone stopped me in the hall, somebody who's been here for many years, to tell me they volunteered for the training and they were looking forward to it. So I think that's a good sign. John and I attended a seminar on sunshine laws, public records, and ethics for public officers and public employees. This proved to be fruitful in a number of ways, including the advisory opinion that you see today. We formed a relationship with the general counsel for the State Ethics Commission as a result of that. Tasker and I met with the budget liaison. He gave us some additional tools for managing the budget, which was really good. So from day to day, there's one system where we can go in and get summaries, but there's another one we can go in that they made available to us where we can see on a given day exactly what is. So helps us keep up with our dollars. So and we also adjusted our budget for administrative specialist position going from part-time to full-time. We also continue the development of the annual ethics training course, and we'll be doing that until probably the middle of June, I believe it is. I think that's what I promised. And then we maintain our day-to-day duties as well as responding to ethics complaints, and the measure of which we cannot publicly disclose. So next time we have a Friday meeting, we may be able to bring you up to speed. That's all I can tell you on that. With regard to the budget, everything that you see in red, we're having the budget adjusted. The bottom line is, as long as the unencumbered and unexpended amount, it doesn't go in the red, the rest of it doesn't matter, because it all comes from those dollars and cents. But we've asked them to make adjustments so that our budget doesn't show red. And then that's just a matter of moving money around. For instance, in unclassified professional fees, we actually took some of the money from there that used to be 40,000. We moved some of that to the salaries because we're not going to spend that kind of money. I think if I remember correctly, that's where the campaign contribution refund program is, and we allocate $20,000 and we don't spend $1,000. So that's just an example of the flexibility that we have. The encumbered amount of 19,000.
The unclassified professional fees, does that include court reporters when needed?
I think that's where we put it. Actually, we may put that under legal services. One of the two. Okay. I don't remember. Legal services is also where John is. And then you see the 19,650 that's encumbered. That is the payment for the investigation that was done on our behalf. And I think we paid him at an hourly rate of something like $200 an hour. That's what it came to. So that gives you some idea of when I'm doing an investigation, the time, kind of time, resources that go into it. And then I have a year, that's a monthly one, and then we also gave you, and the one behind it, that's just a year to date, to give you a view of the budget. But the bottom line is, we're in very good shape. And, some things we may want to do, we'll wait until the end of the fiscal year to consider it. My computer is up and down. It's been 3 years and it's let me do it. And we'll see where we are at the end of the fiscal year if we replace it.
Information, when is our fiscal year?
September 30th is the end of the fiscal
Okay,
year.
thank you.
So October 1st to September 30th fiscal year. Any questions about the budget? And then the monthly issue report. And I'll get to go through these one by one, starting the one 2/14/23 caller. You see that was from a 954 area code. I did call the person back and spoke with them, and they had contacted the Florida Commission on Ethics. So I recommend closing that one. The second one, the caller was an intern. He left a message saying he was working on the vehicle when a part broke. The supervisor, and he was trying to remove some bolts from a crankshaft. The supervisor was observing. He told us his supervisor needed to get some tools. And while he was gone, the supervisor broke it. And then the supervisor wanted to put him on a PIP, and he refused it. And he said, I don't know if it was recorded on the camera or not. I spoke with the assistant city manager for that area, and she sought to resolve it. I spoke with him since then, and they moved him to another area. And John and I, we went back and forth on this one and felt that this was more in the errant line of HR than an ethics complaint. And we didn't want to get the board entangled in constant HR dealings that maybe didn't rise to the level of really what the intent is for the ethics ordinance. So we recommend closing that one. I spoke to the caller who complained that she gave a bus driver donuts to give to one of his peers, and instead he ate them and shared them with others. She stated that she had a witness to this, and so he bought some more donuts for the driver. And I referred her to assistant manager in that chain of command and recommend closing that one. Then a caller reported that a city truck driver deliberately ran a red light, was basically driving recklessly. With the assistance of church clerk's office, we used the identification that she gave for the truck, and as it turned out, it wasn't a city truck. So there's nothing I could do with that after that. So we recommend closing that one. 11/3/2022, this complaint where Mr. Sims alleges that the mayor daily violated the ethics code at 2 private meetings. If you go behind the gray sheet of paper, this one, the other great writing is mine. and with John's input. And we just weave people a lot. And,
Ninth grade.
we rely on each other, which is good because I think we balance each other very well. And there are just points where an attorney needs to be involved. It shouldn't be just me. So even on this letter, John had input, and on the legal memorandum, he gave me a chance to read it. And if I had suggest any changes, then he makes those changes. That's how this works. And I'm going to ask him to walk you through the legal memorandum briefly.
So, so it was a single complaint form directed at two individuals, so we treated it as two separate complaints, one directed at the mayor, another directed at Commissioner Williams Cox. And it revolved primarily around this funding issue to combat gun violence. It appears that in late August, there were possibly two meetings at the mayor's home where he invited members of the community. It appears, based on a story in the Democrat, that they were members of a group or an association called Capital Area Justice Ministry that felt strongly about the issue. They met at his home to discuss what they thought would be best. WFSU ran a story where they quoted one of the attendees who said that they discussed specific programs and specific dollar amounts. This issue was, I think, subject to the campaign at the time. On October 12th, City Commission held its workshop on the gun violence issue. The mayor explicitly mentioned that he had met with the coalition of the ministers and that they had made recommendations. And he made a motion which was unanimously approved by the where they allocated $2 million in funding over a 2-year period. The specific entities and the dollar amounts that were identified by this Miss Edwards in the paper did not receive the funding. I think that was the general sense of the complaint, was that there was this meeting, all the money was divvied up at this private meeting, and then it was just essentially rubber stamped at the public meeting. And it appears that that was not the case. Primarily, the message that was conveyed at the private meeting that was conveyed is that they wanted to follow what is called the GBI.
HSP. It's the HSP process.
That's one of them, but they also have the, okay, there's a gun violence, oh, here we go. Right in front of me, gun violence intervention strategy, which is a program formulated by experts in the field from outside Tallahassee. And that was essentially the position that the city commission took. So laid out, bless you, that and the allegation in this and against Commissioner Williams Cox was misuse of public position. Laid out the three elements of the misuse of public position are persons acting as a public official. They are acting inconsistent with their normal duties, proper performance of their duties, and that they are providing a benefit or special privilege to a third person. As we've discussed on past occasions, one of the reasons that we asked the city commissioner to change the misuse is that pretty much every city commissioner or public official, when they are acting on behalf of a constituent, is going to be acting in their official capacity and benefiting that constituent. That's kind of what we expect them to do. The key is that it's inconsistent with the proper performance of the duties. So I laid out the analysis to determine whether what was done by the mayor was consistent with the proper performance of his duties. Laid out two possible scenarios that here. This was put it in context during the heat of a pretty hotly contested runoff election, in which the mayor was seeking re-election. The event appears to describe what I would consider to be like a town hall event where members of the public are providing ideas and engaging in a conversation with an elected official as they seek election. The other point was that the recommendations appear from the WFSU article to have been made by the Capital Area Justice Ministry, not by the mayor. And as I pointed here, they do have a First Amendment right to petition their government in doing so. And I think it's also important to point out that everything that was done by the mayor was done in a transparent manner and done, he went on the record, said this meeting took place, discussed what happened to it, and said, and even told the paper I would do it again. I think that's because he believes there was nothing done wrong, and that was the conclusion that I reached. So I did recommend that we dismiss it as not being legally sufficient. As far as Commissioner Diane Williams-Cox, this one was more complicated because then when they went to the workshop where they voted on the appropriations, one of the gentlemen that was at one of the meetings at Daly's home, this Whitfield Leland, was given an opportunity to speak like everybody else is allowed to speak. And the complainant here, Mr. Sims, felt that he should not have been allowed to speak at the meeting because he was currently involved in at that point, a 3-year criminal case that involved law enforcement. And he felt that that should be a disqualifier and he should not be allowed to address city commissions. I point out that while there are issues of fraud that prohibit you from being a vendor, this is not one of those issues. So there was no reason for them to deny Mr. Leland for making his presentation and to seek funding from the commission. And ultimately, that funding was denied by the commission. So essentially, the fact that Commissioner Williams-Cox was the one, I think, who invited Mr. Leland to speak, and he felt like kind of helping him along with his presentation. He felt that that was a misuse of public position, and it just seems clear that that would not be. So I would recommend that be also dismissed for lacking legal sufficiency.
Yeah, so if what is alleged were true, it still would not come to the level of legal sufficiency. So that's why we dismissed that one. So I recommend closing that one. And Chair, I would invite you to open the floor to the board if they have any questions, comments, concerns.
Does anyone have any questions or comments or concerns?
I do.
Mr. King?
I don't have any problem with your finding lack of legal sufficiency, but I'm wondering, just for clarification and discussion, the meeting at the mayor's house, these were people that were representing organizations requesting money from the city. Was it ever discussed whether they qualified as lobbyists and should have registered as lobbyists?
Well, we discussed it.
Yes.
We did not.
And because it's not, and had you heard if that was discussed at all at that meeting or anything?
And to be honest, we would have to go look at because what you're dealing with, in that regard, you would be dealing with persons who are registered with the city as lobbyists. And I would have to look and see if that would get into other issues. Some of the same people are applying for money. I would think that the Amy's behind me, but I would think that when they were doling out money, the city attorney and others would be on top of that issue as well. We have addressed it. That was a good question.
Do you have any more questions?
That's it.
I have a question just as far as timeline, and it's probably in here, but the article that was in the Democrat that said, here's how Tallahassee's divvying up 1 million to stop shootings. Was that after the meeting or after the money was divvied up that article came out? Or was that probably was that foreshadowing how they were going to be dividing up the money? Or
Well, there's two articles.
I didn't read
The
that article.
WFSU article that quotes this Miss Edwards, who said, this is what was agreed upon. They were going to allocate these dollar amounts to these groups.
At that meeting that was decided, or at the workshop that was?
She claims this occurred at the Daly home. That's not remotely close to how the money was eventually allocated. So, and the article from the Democrat that talks about which groups received the money was from October 13th, which came out the day after
Okay,
the meeting.
thank you.
It was only the mayor at the meet. It was the mayor and the citizen groups. It wasn't the mayor, other commissioners and the citizen group. It was just the mayor. It was just one elected, and
That would have been a sunshine.
that's what I was trying to figure. With the two, I was trying to figure out whether Ms. Williams Cox was at that as well, or whether it
Her
was
conduct is limited to what she did from the dais
the workshop.
at the workshop. Yes.
One other thing I had, and this is not about facts, yeah, and it's purely, I do criminal law, so it jumped out at
I
me.
don't. So,
There's a line in here where it says the state or the
page 4,
or
second paragraph under the Williams Cox amendment. The word court null process.
and I've not looked at the court record. The thing that just jumped out to me is null prost is the term when the state drops it. So if it says it was null prost, the state dropped Mr. Leland's charges, not the court dismisses them. So for whatever it's worth, if it makes any difference, or at least to memorialize it correctly, the null prost should be state rather than court.
If the board wishes, we could just make an amendment and change it from court to state.
Is that a friendly amendment? Does everybody agree with that?
Make note.
Any other concerns or questions about this advisory opinion? Do we want to vote on this one by itself? Or do we want, does everyone feel a little more comfortable with that? And then we can talk about the other one? Or actually, this is my suggestion, is that we do the first 4, because they seem pretty kind of straightforward. And then we do this one. And then we can talk about the last one to get the, is that okay with everybody? Okay, so in reference to the first 4, would anyone like to make a motion to close the first 4 monthly issue reports?
So moved.
Okay, Mr. Commissar seconds. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed? Okay. And now let's talk about this one. Any more comments or questions or concerns about this before someone decides to make a motion? However, anybody feels moved to make a motion to close the report? Okay. Mr. Kelly makes a motion to close the issue from November 3rd, 2022. Second. Calhoun seconds. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Let's talk about the last one.
I'm sorry. Helping me.
Okay.
Okay. And on this one was for me, and you can tell it's not on that great level. And John summarized for me, and then I edited it to make it mine. For example, on the last page, where it says fees for frivolous complaints, frivolous claims, first paragraph there is a summary, and then the following paragraph, actually where it says, we take every complaint seriously, review every detail, having this office cannot continue to expend resources. Furthermore, I refer you to several outside sources. Or explains it to explain why this is with prejudice. A lot of this has been explained to him before. And we have given him recommendations on if he thinks his free speech and his freedom of movement are being, if he feels he's being wrong in those areas, he needs to get legal counsel. That's not something we can deal with. And I've had those discussions with him, and he always answers with, I can't afford an attorney, but it doesn't change our position. I explained to him the process. When he was in my office, I attempted to explain to him the process again so he would not have expectations that are unreasonable, and he didn't allow me to. So I invited him to leave, and I told him if he wasn't interested in listening, he could leave. Because he was loud enough that people heard him at the end of the hall, and it disturbed the whole floor. I respectfully and politely and asked him to leave. At one point, he said to me, are you going to have to wait till somebody shoots me before you do something? And I told him that I can't protect him. So he needs to not do anything that's going to get himself shot because I can't protect him. That's not what the board is here for. So I was very explicit in responding to him. He can be melodramatic. And as John will explain, this isn't, he has his own agenda when it comes to the city commission. And even though we give him advice on where he should go elsewhere to deal with his issues, he keeps trying to force them on the board. I can't remember how long ago it was. It may have been 2021. The board addressed frivolous complaints. Ms. Ruby Barr lightly explained to him at that point that, because he was mad at me because I dismissed another complaint with prejudice. And she explained to him that the board could do more in terms of making him pay for all the resources that are being used to deal with the same complaint over and over again. And I think the biggest thing for people to understand is that if you send me a complaint, I'm going to take it serious, even if I think it's something I've seen before, because it could be that one little thing in there that may make sense. But when it's the same thing over and over again, and he refused to listen because he wants to force us to do what he wants, and he's going to, wherever he thinks is going to support that, that's when it becomes frivolous. But I'll let John to it.
Just for the record, you get the behavior that you reward.
Mhm.
You can put that in what you want, but as long as I've been on here, and it's been a full year, revolving door issue, every board meeting. And look how much time it's taken up. So I think at some point, you're right to claim at some point, if this continues, then charges will be assessed and move forward. I think you're doing the right thing. And before we, just to preface this, I think at a couple of meetings ago, he had addressed the board and said that had been barred from City Hall, and which I thought was strange since he was here in City Hall to tell us. Turns out he was not barred from City Hall. He was barred from individual offices, which seems reasonable. He still is able to come to the meetings, address the city commission as every other. I think Ms. Tasker, I think, did a very good job, and as the gatekeeper, he did try to get into Dwight's office by telling the front desk, which office is that? It's
Growth management.
Growth Management, that he was Dwight's cousin from Pasadena.
Yes. Yes, he did.
And when it was realized he doesn't have a cousin from Pasadena,
Yeah.
Ms. Tasker went out and intercepted him and said, this is not how we do things. You can't lie to people to get in the door, et cetera. So, but we essentially, I think when we last discussed this, we did say that if we have to keep doing this, we will assess fees. But I think Dwight was in a forgiving mood and said, we're not going to do it this time. But what occurred here was it starts off in this meeting on December 7th when Sims, I think, was speaking to the commission. He claims that the chief of police was heckling him. And then he was loudly heckling him. Then he yelled out in front of the city commission. And then everyone, I don't know who that would be, called Mr. Sims a liar. And then he also mentioned that he was treated differently than the Caucasian speakers that preceded him who were not heckled. The complaint was filed against Reese Goad and Cynthia Barber, the city manager, and she's the deputy city manager, because he demanded that an investigation of the police chief be commenced because of this loud heckling. And they did not initiate an investigation against the police chief, so that was the grounds for this complaint. So we dismissed that as being legally insufficient. As far as Miss Cynthia Shingles, who I believe is an assistant to Ms. Barber.
Yes.
Yes. And we have 11 videos and photos that outline this incident that occurred on February 22nd last month, where I think it begins with Mr. Sims, I guess it looked like he was walking this direction towards the Inspector General's office or the accounting department. Police officer followed to make sure he wasn't trying to get into the offices. He then said he was going to the bathroom. He confronted the police officer and they had a little shouting match over here by the drinking fountain. Mr. Sims then walked back towards the front, and there Miss Shingles, I think, was videotaping him, and she was videotaping her. They were videotaping each other. And then there was another person videotaping. We had like 3 angles of this. And then he went and spoke to a news reporter. And he said that the videotaping of him by her was harassment. So he wanted us to, so he filed a complaint against her for that. So again, we dismissed that as not being legally sufficient. And then as Dwight said, we did state in this letter to him that, we could be going after him for fees. That's in our rules, and we've chosen not to do so. But at some point, if he has legitimate complaints, we definitely want to hear them. But, we can't have every personal grievance that he has be brought to this board so we can hear about it and tell him we can't do anything. So.
Yes, and I just want to point out 2 things. One, he's disingenuous because he's not here. He asked for an explanation, and he's not here to hear it. And this is consistent with, he just wants to hear what he wants to hear, and that's it. It reminds me of some of the other cases that I've had, and I'm not saying he is, but I'm saying it reminds me of other cases I had where it was clear the person was delusional, and they don't want to hear anything but what they want to hear. And, I've observed from my position, and I'll use Cynthia Barber, who has tried to help numerous people. And unfortunately, they'll come back and sue her, file a complaint against her, even though she's tried to help them. And that's what this reminds me of.
I do have a question about the videos, and I don't necessarily need to see them. Obviously, the board can make that decision collectively. But in your opinion, was he being heckled or being treated unprofessionally? If it was you standing there, would you have felt how he's feeling if you were the subject of these videos?
Honestly, number one, I wouldn't put myself in that, but he puts himself in that position by the way he treats people. And the bottom line is that they weren't doing anything that he wasn't doing. The sad part is he heckles city commission in city commission meetings. We don't have anything that shows that he was heckled in all of the videos and stuff that we saw, but it still wouldn't rise. Well, it wouldn't rise to the level of ethics. I mean, who's going to benefit from him being heckled other than, people being annoyed? But he's taken something that's on a personal level and tried to make an ethics complaint. And a lot of this he initiates and then blames other people for it.
Vice Chairman Costa asked a question that I think he was going to go down that road, and I did. I'm going to be a little more specific.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Is there video of the council meeting that he alleges that the chief of police heckled him? And if not, there isn't. They don't videotape their
Yes,
meetings.
they do.
There would be.
There would be, but I didn't look at it.
Okay, that was my
I
question.
might point out that I was at the meeting, as I go to most of the meetings, and I honestly don't recall ever the chief raising his voice to anybody. He's actually a very quiet person, so.
And the reason for that question and the importance of that answer, and that's why viewing the video might be good. It's one thing to file trivial complaints. It's another to file false complaints.
Mm-hmm.
And if that never happened, that's what we have on our hands. And that takes it to another level to me. And I think that destroys his credibility. I don't know if that's what happened. We have a board member who said he doesn't recall that happening, and filing false reports is a whole different scenario that we need to consider.
Right.
I would think that if the police chief yelled at a city commission meeting, we would have read about it on the front page of the
newspaper, I would think so too, but I
So
don't assume anything.
go ahead and we could go ahead and look at it and report back.
Yeah, I think it would be nice to know for sure. Not that I don't
No,
want.
I'm just going by my memory.
Just for the sake of, I
I
understand.
think it's a good idea.
That's what I was gonna ask as well, because it seems like one that should be black or white, because the way I read it, it sounds like he's there giving his 3 minutes and somebody yells from the back of the room. And if that happened, it might be out of our purview, but it's not a good thing. But then again, if it didn't happen and you claim that that happened and there's video that didn't, that's also not a good thing.
Understood.
Question, you're referring to assessment of costs and fees. Do we have a fee schedule of any sort?
Well, we know what we pay him per hour and we know what I get.
That's costs, but are you talking about additional fees?
We don't have a fee schedule for that. I would recommend just, if we get to that we just look at what it costs us. And that time that is taken away from doing our job too. Because one of the things one of the things I highlighted in this is that he emails me almost every time he contacts the city, whether it has anything to do with this board or not. And, and I know some of that is because he wants to show me the global conspiracy. But if it doesn't pertain to an ethics complaint, we shouldn't be receiving it. And you can tell him not to, but then he's just gonna mock you and continue to do it, as was the case with the city commission member.
It's the cost of fees. That's just language I just use from my legal practice. Usually your costs are what it costs you to file a complaint, which here wouldn't be anything. And the fees would be the legal, reasonable attorney's fees.
Some pretty good attorney general opinions regarding what you can charge for public records. They're not valid requests. They're just putting work on a city or work on a board. Those might be good guidelines for us to take a look at, but.
And for anybody's concerned, there's a lot of good work to do. It gets in the way. And that's why we're just getting it here. We, for example, spend a lot of time on the advisory opinion, which is going to set a precedent going forward. And so there's a lot of good work that gets set aside to deal with a personal agenda.
So I'm feeling like we might want to table this one for the next meeting, either after people have a chance to go back and watch that December 7th meeting. Or we'd like to see any videos, if not, or just open for discussion, or you? good with-
I feel we can move forward on it. I think that the evidence is before us. I trust their judgment. I trust their opinion that we can make a motion and dispose of, but it would be just nice to have that additional information so that we'd all be edified on is this frivolous or is it false? You know, if we're getting continuous false complaints, that's a whole different level of issue. And I mean, you can disagree with me. That's my feeling.
I mean, well, even if the police chief had jumped up and down and yelled and screamed, it wouldn't be a violation. So I think we could come back with a report just so we know, but it wouldn't have any effect on closing the complaint.
But I think it's an important conversation to have moving forward as we consider whether something is false versus
Yes.
whether it isn't so.
And I'm gonna go back. I hate to be redundant. You get the behavior reward. If there's a 3 minute, 5 minutes for talking, we should hold everybody to it. And when we don't, we encourage them to come back and espouse the same thing over and over again. So just something to think about.
One more comment, if you grant it. I commend your patience with Mr. Sims. He can be trying, and anybody who's been around him for many years knows that you can try your patience. He also occasionally comes up with something good to say. And there is a place for gadflies in American political system. So I hope you'll maintain your patience and continue to allow him to speak. And every once in a while, we might come across something that's worth hearing.
I think Dwight made that point earlier. He's gonna listen to every complaint.
Yeah.
Even if there's 100 bad ones, there might.
Obviously, you've done a good job so far. Yeah.
Right, thank you.
Would you like to make a motion?
So moved.
We have a motion to recommend closing this last complaint.
Second.
Calhoun seconds. All in favor? Aye. All opposed?
I'm gonna move John over there. He just reminded me that he's my cousin, so.
Yeah, but this, you have to have at least a 12th grade writing ability.
We're gonna get him a tutor in the summer.
What's on your report, Bill?
That's the report. Thank you.
And let's see. Advisory opinion, agenda item 8.
You're doing it? Or just me?
Yes, sir, I'll do an intro. And you've received an amended version of the advisory opinion. And actually, it started, I was verbally asked for an opinion. And I was sent an email, and I responded to the email, and it said something slightly different from where we ended up on what I call the second version. And then there were questions from 2 or 3 sources. So we looked at it more in depth. I talked to the general counsel from State Ethics Commission regarding part of it. And then John talked to the State Ethics Commission, looked up cases. I was trying to be his law clerk, and I was looking up stuff he had already seen. We were really trying to be diligent about this. The police department, by the time they saw this, they'd already decided that they were not going to participate in any case, in either one, either the conference or the video. So at this stage, it's not so much about them as it is the precedent we set with this opinion. Because I can tell you that from the fire department to the utilities, there's a lot of engagement, competition, gifts from, small minor gifts from vendors. And it needs to be casual and in some instances expected. And people ask me, there's nothing done in darkness, no, but they asked me and informally. So I thought, and I think that this is a good place to put on the record the board's position. The other part before he starts is that as especially those of you who are lawyers know, when you're dealing with statutes, the way they start out may not be the way they end up. I had the pleasure of editing bills, helping create bills, legislation, having to go look at the Florida law, trying to figure out what the intent was for a bill because it's not clear in the law, because the law or rule is so confusing. And I blame your attorneys for that. But, that seems to be a constant when it comes to legalities. It's very challenging sometimes to understand the law. And I think it's important to say that this board is not bound by other folks' opinions, except up to a point. And I hope John will address that to some extent. But whatever this board decides, based on what we've given you as a start, would be coming from this board. And he'll correct me on anything that I say wrong, but you're doing this for the city ordinance, for the ethics code, not so much for city policy, because that's something the city will address on their own if they're asked. And you're not doing it for state ethics commission, except that some of what they do, we use their definitions. So that's where things kind of get combobulated, for that term, discombobulated. So I've tried to create an introduction to fix what I messed up.
No, I think it was fine. This advisory opinion was it aged me. I will And I do need to recognize Amy Tillman, the deputy city attorney behind me. Actually, we were bouncing ideas off her last week as well, because it was just impossible to get our heads wrapped around this issue. And as far as the gift issue and the honorarium, I really don't agree with the findings or the opinion of the State Commission on Ethics. But I'll get into that in just a minute and I'll explain. And like I think Dwight said, if we don't agree with what they're saying we should be doing, we do have the option. We defer on the issue of gifts to the state definition of gifts. Our ordinance doesn't define it. We defer to the state by reference, the state statute by reference. We can always change that if we wanted to deal with the issue of honorarium and honorarium events. So, but first and foremost, this was an issue, a company that manufactures body cameras for law enforcement, made two requests to a supervising officer with the police department. First, he was asking the two members of the police department attend their annual conference in Phoenix, Arizona, to sit on a panel to discuss the manner in which they use the body camera. I think the Tallahassee Police Department, based on what we heard, I think deserves good credit for what they've been doing, because they have, what they've done is when they're dealing with an individual that appears to have some type of mental illness, and possibly a mental health professional would be better equipped to resolve the issue than a police officer. Instead of sending the mental health professional into a situation that could very easily become dangerous, they have the mental health professional viewing the situation through a live feed on the body camera and providing input to the officer through an earpiece.
Well, that's actually through the body cam.
Oh, through, okay. So sounds like a great concept. And the company said, we think that this is a great way to resolve an issue that could become dangerous. And we'd like these two officers from Tallahassee to come and speak about what, according to them, only Tallahassee is doing.
Well, only nobody else in North America is doing this. And so that's what made it a big deal. How recently they were excited about it.
Okay. But other parts of the world, maybe, I don't know,
Yes.
but North America only.
That's
So the question was, could they pay these two officers could they pay for their airfare, pay for their hotel, admit them into the conference for free so they could appear on the panel and then have them come home? So that was the first issue. The second one is they wanted to, I think, use two people, either the same two or other two, to appear in a video, and I call it promotional video because it would talk about what they're doing and why this camera is a great camera. And I think the video was going to be used at the conference, but there was nothing that said it couldn't be used after the conference. So we addressed that issue separately, and we applied the misuse of public position to that, whereas we applied the solicitation and acceptance of gifts to the first issue of them just going to the conference and speaking on the panel. The second one, I'll do that one first. It's easy. We found that it would be a violation. It is inconsistent with their regular duties as officers to appear in promotional videos for vendors. So they're acting in their official capacity. This company is obviously receiving a benefit because they're using this promotional video. It's not consistent with their duties. This use of public position applies to covered individuals as defined in the ordinance and city employees in general. So it would not make a difference on whether the police officer was just a city employee who didn't have any purchasing power, or whether they were a procurement employee within the police department. So we simply said that one was kind of an easy one. That one cannot be done. So that's your summary number two, question number two. The one that has created the problems is whether they could go to the conference. So there is a difference in the statute, and I think Amy was the one who really was sound enough on this, between an honorarium and an event related to an honorarium event. So when you go into your definition of gift, which is found in section 112.312, it lists the definition of gift as exemptions. And one of the exemptions is honorarium or expenses related to honorarium events. but it doesn't define what an honorarium is in that section. However, if you jump forward to 112.3149, it does define what an honorarium is. And there, payment or provision of actual, okay, that's the exception. In here somewhere. Yep, oh no, it's right here. Page 4, 4 paragraphs down. An honorarium is further defined as a payment of money or anything of value directly or indirectly to a reporting individual, or pure employee, or to any other person on his or her behalf, or speech or writing, not to include a book. Reporting individual under state statute is somebody who files a form of limited disclosure of financial interest. And a procurement employee is a procurement employee. Our covered individual definition that's in section 2-3 of local ordinance creates this new definition of a covered individual, which is essentially the same thing as combining those two groups together. So by reading the reporting individuals and procurement employees together, you're essentially getting exactly what we would cover under our definition of the covered individual. So I was able to read all of that and not have to parse, well, that's only these reporting people, these aren't procurement. It essentially covers all of our covered individuals. 3149 also lists, they do a belt and suspenders approach, where they say these people cannot receive an honorarium from vendors, lobbyists, etc. And then the next paragraph says that these vendors and lobbyists cannot provide an honorarium. So they kind of get them both ways. In case one person doesn't know they can't do it, the other one should know they can't pay it. So they have that. But it does not define honorarium event. But if you go to the rule as adopted by the Ethics Commission, they've adopted 34-13.220, which defines an honorarium, which really is nearly identical to the definition that already exists in 112.3149 of Florida statutes. So that's not really a big deal. But if you jump down one more, you get to 34-13.230, and that defines an honorarium event. This is the part that turned my hair gray. It says an honorarium event means a meeting or function or a series of related meetings or functions, such as a convention, held over several days where the reporting individual or procurement employee has been invited to make a speech, address, oration, or other oral presentation as defined in Rule 34-13.220. So it then makes me go back to the previous rule that states the honorarium includes a payment. So me reading upon that would say, okay, well, an expense related to an honorarium event would have to be related to an event where you are speaking and receiving a payment or an honorarium for it to be an honorarium event. I don't know if that seems reasonable to you, but the Ethics Commission does not believe that should be the case. They have taken the position, and they cite it goes back over 30 years. Commission on Ethics Opinion 91-4 stated where a mayor and his wife were going to an event to give a speech. He was not going to receive an honorarium because he was not allowed to receive an honorarium, but they wanted to pay his expenses to get there and back, and the commission said that he could. So when I spoke to the general counsel for the Ethics Commission, he said, well, the way it's handled is if in theory they could receive an honorarium, even if they don't, we treat it as an honorarium event and the expenses can be paid. So then I said, well, what if we got the 112.3149 and it's a group that can't pay you an honorarium because you're prohibited? Would that still be considered an honorarium event? He said yes, which I that's where I couldn't wrap my head around it. So he said, so essentially really what's going to trigger it is if it's a meeting or function where the person's giving an address, a speech, oration, or oral presentation, then that's all it's going to do to trigger. The fact that they call it an honorarium event doesn't really require them to receive an honorarium for those expenses to now be excluded from the definition of gift. So that was the conclusion that we reached. Also, as he pointed out, and it's in footnote 1 on page 5, there is a CE Form 10, which is a form that you would file with the Commission on Ethics. And as he pointed out, the form was adopted through the rulemaking process, so it has the power of an administrative rule. This is the form that people where they list gifts, uh, gifts from direct support organizations, and they have a specific issue, Part C, honorarium event-related expenses. And so it's their position that because this has now been adopted by rule, this would allow them to not include the expenses paid for an event as a gift, regardless of whether they receive an honorarium. So that's where we are. So while I'm not sure I would have reached that same conclusion if I were looking at this
And then the note.
at first blush.
Would you explain the note?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. We also, and I think we've discussed this on prior opinions, there's a series of cases where if the person, if the organization pays state agency and the state agency selects the person to attend, pays for the person to attend, then they're reimbursed by the organization. That does not violate the gift ban. That's not an honorarium. That takes this completely out. So that's a good way to not have to deal with all of this, I guess, and it's typically done. It's important to point out, however, for those to trigger, the agency has to control who attends. So the employee can't say, hey, I want to go. Can you pay my bills and just run it through the city? That would not be permitted. The city has to maintain control of who goes. So that is kind of a little note we put there, and we've used this on prior opinions to show that there's this area that would not apply. So that's kind of where we are. So as far as covered individuals, now I don't even remember what we said. Yeah, the result would, they could go to this conference in Phoenix, Arizona, and have them pay their expenses, lodging, and admission, as long as they speak on the panel. And whether they're a covered individual, just a city employee, does not matter.
Actually, that's not what the
Hmm?
I don't think that's what the opinion says. You asked a question about whether it's a violation, and you said in the case of the city employee, it was answered in the affirmative. They're not a covered provincial, it's negative, but there might be other considerations.
Whereas,
Maybe it's just the way the question is posed.
yeah, I know is it on page 1?
Yeah, question 1, does the city employee who has been invited to be a presenter violate the ethics code ban? And then you answered it.
You're looking at the older version.
Oh, yeah, you look at the older version.
Sorry.
Sorry. So yeah, so they're both, I said the result is the same for both groups. In the case where the city employee would be a covered individual, the question is answered in the negative. In the case where the city employee would not be a covered individual, this question is also answered in the negative.
Sorry, my system.
No,
that's
okay. That's okay.
Sure.
No, we've been churning this out.
Yes.
So, the general counsel was at, I didn't get to talk to him yesterday. He was out of the office. So that's essentially the advisory opinion. I would argue if you don't feel that that outcome is appropriate for the first issue, I think we're kind of bound by the Commission on Ethics since we have deferred to state statute on the definition. But like I said before, that wouldn't preclude us from making a recommendation to the city commission to change the ordinance. We are authorized under state statute to adopt an ethics code that's more stringent than the state code. And we could very well do that if we felt that was necessary or appropriate.
So what you're saying is we could, if the board is comfortable with what you presented, you can leave it there. Or if you're not comfortable, you can come up with your own definition rather than relying on the state's definition and ask the city commission to adopt it. It'd be a matter of whether they agree to do it or not.
This advice,
Yes, Ms.
But
Calhoun.
this advisory would be bound by the rules as we now have them. Okay.
Two questions. First of all, I think it's important that definition for what an honorarium is not should be mentioned too. You didn't mention that in your discussion. That's critical because it defines specifically what they're attempting to do. And under the state administrative code, it says that's not an honorarium. In my history, as a consultant, that's an honorarium. So I think it's interesting that the state statute says it's not an honorarium. And if you're getting expenses paid, and you're getting a hotel.
It's actually at the bottom of page 4, it says, the term honorarium does not include payment of actual and reasonable transportation of all food and beverages. Now, there is another section that says if instead of a hotel room, they're giving you a penthouse, then the excess amount could be used as an honorarium. I didn't get to that because it was already so much in the weeds, but that's another issue we could have addressed. But it wasn't an issue that's raised here. We could cross that bridge down the road if somebody is going to be, instead of flying commercial, now they're getting a private plane. Instead of staying in a hotel room, they're getting a whole floor at a hotel. We could cross that bridge. But is that you're saying more than this?
No, what I'm saying is that definition precludes them, what they're doing is being considered an honorarium. That answers the question. No, they're not receiving an honorarium according to the state code, so it's perfectly fine.
Expenses.
But then at the same time, you say that this is later on page 5.8. I think this is important. The city employee, however, would still be bound by restrictions of state law that would prevent them from accepting these benefits. So on the one hand, our code doesn't prohibit it currently. Some of the ethics code at the state level doesn't prohibit it, but apparently there's other state statutes or rules or laws that prohibit them from accepting these benefits.
There's the over $100 limit that's in 112.3148, which we didn't get. And I think that kind of runs hand in hand with the policy that the city has. So, which is why I think I mentioned 3 times here, please consult with the city attorney's office before you do anything, because there are other issues that you need to be aware of. And I do believe the city does very aggressively point out the 3148 restrictions.
And we didn't include that here because that's beyond our bounds.
Sure.
But
But at the end of the day,
at the end of the
they
day,
can't do it.
yeah, at the end of the day, I don't think they could do it.
They can't, not by state law,
Under
by
our-
potentially city policy, they'd be violating.
They can't do what?
They can't accept.
They can't get the free transportation to go to this.
You answered it in the negative, so you're saying.
From our code, I don't know what the city policy is, but I just said they need to go to the city to find out what they're allowed to do or not allowed to do, in case you have a policy that is outside the ethics code that might restrict what they're allowed to do.
But we would take the same analysis of the honorarium. Can I just, do you mind if I comment?
Yeah.
Do you mind?
Go right ahead.
So I'm just gonna take it in step back a bit and take it look at it the way I look at it from a more, like a lay person's, analysis, because I find the law on I've been working in this field for a long time, and I have always found the law on honorariums very confusing. And what I think is intended by the statute, although it's not to Dwight's point, it's not necessarily in the words of the statute. I think the idea of an honorarium is somebody at a high level who is paid to write a book about their experiences as the Secretary of the Department of Children and Families, or is paid to appear at a conference as the, keynote speaker because they have this very high up position at FDLE, something like that. I think that's really what the honorarium concept is supposed to be. We're not supposed to take those. That's prohibited. But it's hard to get somebody, even in a high up position, to go to a conference if you don't pay their expenses, right? So they say you can take the expenses and then, but if it becomes excessive and you get the penthouse, then you're really just disguising an honorarium, which we've already told you is not permitted, right? So the thing that's, I think, troubling about this, and I'm not suggesting in any way that this opinion is incorrect. The thing that's really troubling about it is, to the extent you've worked in or around state agencies, it's really hard to get people to come and talk on panels, right? So how are you going to get a, lineman to come and talk on a panel about what he or she knows if we say that you have to pay your own expenses to get there, right? Like nobody's gonna go do that. We're not talking about high-level keynote speakers. We're talking about somebody on a panel who, you know, can give their sort of view of something. It is complicated by the fact that this is a vendor that the city deals with and all that stuff. That's why the second answer is probably accurate unless the city pays and decides who to send. But the question of, I guess when we talked about this, honorarium doesn't even come to my mind in this really because of the nature of the people who were going. I think, and I don't know if the general counsel, Stephen, said that, but that's, I think, maybe a way of understanding it, but acknowledging that I understand that's not what the words say, but that's how, in my experience, that is what I have seen over the years, is that if you're just going to share your experience as a DCF caseworker because you have a lot to offer to that conference, that's a whole different thing than asking the Attorney General to come and give a keynote speech at a big conference and offering to pay him. So I don't know if that's helpful or not, but that's just.
There's a confounding variable here, and it's the fact that they're a vendor for the city. And they're receiving money, probably a lot of money, as I understand these body cameras and systems work. It's not like they're going to a conference somewhere, a generic, bold conference with global issues. They're going to a promotion. This conference is to promote their product.
Right.
And so they're accepting money from a vendor of the city, and that's to me the part that makes it a little uncomfortable. If that vendor issue wasn't there, I think this is great just the way everything has gone, but the vendor issue is what I'm concerned about, because, we're not saying that happened, but who knows what backroom deals were made about these kind of pre-arrangements. We'll bring your guys to our conferences in the future. You won't have to pay. We'll pay for everything. You don't know. So that vendor is the one that really sticks in my craw about this whole situation. But I think it's kind of funny, like you said, by state law, if it's over $100, they can't accept it anyway. But the way to get around it is have the city make the decision on who goes, and the city pay for everything, and then reimburse the city.
That's a very common, there, as John said, there's a lot of cases in that. And there's even some that say, well, that just looks like a loophole. And then this Commission on Ethics, it says that it's not. So, whether you think it is or not, there is a rationale for it. It's that the agency, or in our case, the city, is the entity actually making the decision about who goes and what amounts will be spent on that trip. Sometimes the reimbursement is not for the full amounts. Private sector sometimes will just say, we'll pay a couple $1,000s and you pick who you want to say. That does happen. It happens all across state agencies. So again, just like taking a step back, sometimes it's really just, it's hard. I've served on panels. I wouldn't fly myself to Dwight's not going to go someplace by himself and pay on it for his own just to sit on a panel and tell them about something he has experienced. We can't get people to do that. It just doesn't, it's not feasible. So that's what I think the honorarium law is attempting to get around or get at.
Are there any additional questions?
Yeah, I just want to clarify that what we're talking about here is a potential violation by individuals, not the organization, not the city. Even though talking about the vendor of the city, there's a potential question about whether the city should accept such money. But the issue that was addressed here was specifically for individuals, or individuals in violation. The City of Tallahassee is not subject to the Tallahassee Ethics Code. Only individuals are. And in my mind, I guess that's what the Commission on Ethics was speaking about in the definition of honorarium, that as long as the city's in control, they determine who goes and all the details of it, then there may not be an issue with the city getting reimbursed for expenses. And then they cover all costs. The individual does not. That's how I'm seeing it.
And I wanted to make sure I understood the distinction, because I do a gift guide for our employees. And so I understand how hard it is, a little gift journey map. So the restriction of $100, that threshold, it applies to gifts. And honorariums are not the same because they're explicitly exempted. So that threshold wouldn't apply to an honorarium or expenses. Correct? Okay. I just wanted to make that clear.
I was just gonna say, from a practical perspective, I'm glad you brought up the idea of the money flowing through the city, because that was what I was waiting to ask the whole time, is can't we just avoid this entire thing and put it through the city? And I think you're right, that could create some weird, if I'm the other vendor and I learn about this 2 years later, I've got a competitive bidding issue, so maybe it should be brought up in the contracts that this might go on. But my one thought was anything that can be done to stress to the individual in the future who's reading this opinion and thinking about what to do, it seems the answer is run it through the city. Like anything we can do to avoid transactions between vendors and employees reimburse. It's just, if there can be the body in the middle, why does a receipt ever need to get sent to a vendor by an employee, and why should a check ever be? It just creates the ability for false allegations or in wasting people's time or anything else. So, and my follow-up question was going to be, it's hypothetical, so I shouldn't ask it, but like, would the video be different if it flowed through the city? If the company said, hey, City of Tallahassee, you guys did this awesome thing, we want to cut X off your bill or give you X, and will you pick up some great officers to send us to our promotional shoot? So anything we can do, I guess, just to stress that if you're reading this, just run it through the city. Don't attempt to go through 15 different levels to make it okay for you to send a hotel bill to a vendor. Just go through the city and it's all clean.
And the footnote 2, because that's not relevant to this, but that I put that in there to do exactly what you just said, to say, if you're going to do it, this is the way to do it. Don't go this whole other route because it just gets real messy, even though it doesn't apply here. As far as the appearing in the video, I don't think that would still, even if they ran through, because you're still misusing your position. So if I were to try to think of a way to get around it, I could say if maybe a local newspaper did a big story on, oh, Tallahassee is leading the way and using these cameras for law enforcement, then that story could be picked up by the company, used in their promotional videos. That, I think that would be a way to do it. But actually taking our people and putting them in front of camera, using their official titles, speaking on behalf of a private business who has a contract with the city, I don't see how you ever make that right. So.
Yeah, I did send an email and suggest, because it's close to my background. Number one, I suggested that they contact the Police Chiefs Association because they have conferences. I also talked to the executive director of the Police Chiefs Association. She recommended they put something in their summer quarterly, because that's the best way to spread the word, because they're excited about this. I mean, I'm excited about this because I work with training and I know what this means to, I know that they get the word out across the country, not just across the state. Agencies would jump on this because they're always looking for ways not to harm a person with any kind of disability. So we did give them some alternatives based on what we understand and know to try to assist them.
As far as the opinion, I think we have two options. One is to either make a motion about the entire opinion, or if you feel more comfortable splitting up the 1 and the 2, if there's any dissension, whatever is the survey of the board.
I would make a movement to approve them both under one.
Yeah. So
Really?
moved.
Move to approve the entire advisory opinion as is.
Specifically, the amended.
Yes, the amended version that we have
I'll
from
second that.
March 21st.
Look, it's technically not an amended because we never approved the first one. So this is it's just revised in-house.
That's
So I used the,
The most recent version.
it was
It's the amended agenda, not the.
amended agenda.
Yes.
And I think on the very last page of our packet, if this is the one that's actually going out, the company's name got an M in it. On page 8, Axum, it's got an N in the other places, I think.
Okay. Yeah, we can make that change.
Yeah, make sure we get the spelling right.
Fat fingers sometimes.
So Mr. Kelly has made a motion and Mr. Payne has seconded. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you for all your work on that.
Thank you.
Thank you for anything graceful for our benefit. Appreciate that.
And we were looking forward to a robust conversation with this. So that was good. Next thing is to, when I get back to the office, I'm gonna quiz Tasker to see how much she understood.
All right, speaking of, do we have any public comment on non-agenda items? No, okay. And then any member discussion regarding items desired for future agenda? Yes.
Actually, discussion relating to a past agenda item. Last month, you published a letter to the city commission regarding the whistleblower request. Have you had any response to that at all?
No, and I'm going to send an email. I haven't done it yet. I said I was going to, but I'm going to send an email to the city manager to ask him to put it on the city commission agenda and see where that goes. And
One thing that if we haven't received any response at all, and I think that's unfortunate that they haven't responded. But one reason I was thinking of, you think back to the ethics workshop last year, an opinion was stated by the city attorney that a city ordinance would not be sufficient. It would need to be a voter referendum. Has that come back at all? Any mention of that at all? And that concerns me because at the same ethics workshop and in previous meetings, Mayor Daley has expressed his opinion that he would not support any voter referendum unless the city went through a whole charter review, which would take some time. He had been calling on that for almost since he's been elected, actually, initially.
if I may, with regard to the charter, there was a portion of what we had that required amendment to the charter. He was saying that he did not want to address anything that's in the charter until they address the charter as a whole, which is something that they were looking forward to doing. And there was some comment about from their point of view, we should not infrequently bring things to them. What we brought last time was a compromise, and that should be it. But as staff of the board, I don't see it that way, and I won't pursue it that way. I will, and it's a delicate situation because the city commission is not in a good place. And I don't want to pit people against people. I want to make sure that they're focused on our intent. And I think our intent is good with regard to this. So that's why I'm trying to go to the city manager and, to see where that goes. We can be patient and try to work our way through it. And if I run into roadblocks and nothing's happening, then I'll come back to the board and tell you and seek guidance. But it wasn't an easy task when we went to getting her appointed, but we got it done. And so,
One thing I was thinking of, that as far as I understand, the Inspector General is in favor of what we're trying to do, correct? Limited view of the.
He doesn't disagree with it, and he helped frame where we ended. I don't put any words in his mouth, but he helped frame where we ended. Because the bottom line is he covers most employees when it comes to whistleblower protection. Right. But if it involves city commission or his office, there is no protection. And that's what we're looking to cover. So it's practical for us to cover the gap. Essentially, that's just a practical matter. And that's the way I'm trying to present it.
And to be sure I understand, it is an actual gap. That's when I read the statute, it requires whistleblower processes to go through local government if it is relating to the local government. Mm-hmm. So people don't even have the option to go to the Florida Commission on Ethics for work for whistleblower protection in that situation, areas where the Inspector General doesn't cover it. So it's certainly an important issue that I think should be addressed. I was thinking that possibly if there is some reluctance to get it on the agenda, possibly a joint letter from the Inspector General and the Ethics Board, making the request. One thing that came out of the workshop was a directive to you and to Dennis Sutton to work out administrative issues. And as I understand it, you have done that.
Right.
You've got a procedure in place how you would split up.
And I can do that, and knowing where he sits and understanding government, and I'm framing my words here, I don't want to put him in a compromising position, but, I can reference what we have done together and what I believe his position is, and present it that way, and allow him to speak for himself when the time comes.
Following up on that point, I just wanted to ask, because I was trying to wrap my head around that same issue. So is the current state of affairs that there are certain employees who, if they would like to blow the whistle on something, the only person they currently have to go to is the person they'd be blowing the whistle on?
They can't go to them. The statute says that it needs to be addressed by the chief executive officer of the agency, which in this case is the city manager. But that can happen. But if somebody wants to make a complaint against a city commissioner, the Inspector General handles those complaints for all of city government, except he doesn't have jurisdiction over the city commission. He answers to the city commission.
So essentially, no one can make a whistleblowing complaint against an elected city official.
Exactly.
There's nowhere to blow the whistle to.
Or against the Inspector General's office.
And we're sending them letters reminding them of it, not getting a response.
If I could clarify on that. So previously, there was no ordinance that addressed whistleblowers. So we had no internal administrative process. They would just run to circuit court and file a lawsuit without having to go through administrative remedies. The city commission, I think correctly, adopted a process where instead of the city manager, they've designated the inspector general to be the designated city officer to receive whistleblower complaints. But as White mentioned, he doesn't have authority over city commission, appointed officers, et cetera. I don't think he still would not be able to accept a complaint if it involved those individuals. I just don't know where it would go after that, and I don't think that's ever been presented.
So you're saying there is a remedy, but it's in the courts. It's not a.
No. They would still file their complaint with the inspector general.
But if his hands are tied, then he can go, the complainant can go to the circuit court and file a suit against the
They
city.
have to go through, there's a certain process they have to follow. And once that is exhausted, then they could file their civil claim.
I was just gonna say, it's not a point, the only people that the inspector general does not have jurisdiction over is the 5 elected city commissioners.
Well, he has added the city commission staff, their assistants, and he's also added his own office because he doesn't have.
To the whistle, right,
Right.
yeah. Not appointed, I guess I was just getting, somebody said appointed, it's not, he does have jurisdiction over the appointed officials and whistleblower authority over them.
Any other future agenda items? You have a couple directives that I got from the meeting. One would be just information from that December 7th meeting, whether, just for more of a point of information about whether or not it was false complaints or actually truthful. The other was investigating possible fees or costs for future. Thoughts or just looking at some other agencies and what they may be doing, just so we have an idea. We don't necessarily have to vote on anything yet. And then the other was just to follow up on the whistleblower. Any other directives that anybody else would like to see happen before the next meeting? All right, if not, Mr. Payne makes a motion to adjourn. Mr. Kelly seconds, and we are adjourned at 5:39.